On July 27, 2025, the world of international diplomacy was shaken by an announcement from Oslo that no one had expected. The Nobel Peace Prize Committee unveiled a surprising name among its nominees: Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old interim president of Burkina Faso. The press had been waiting for familiar candidates: human rights activists, mediators in ceasefire negotiations, or seasoned diplomats who had brokered peace agreements. Instead, what emerged from the committee's chambers sent shockwaves across continents. The young military leader, more widely recognized for toppling a failing government in 2022 than for signing treaties, was now in the running for the world's most prestigious peace prize. The announcement was delivered in the committee's usual restrained tone, but its impact was anything but restrained. Journalists in the room exchanged startled looks, and within minutes, newsrooms around the world were scrambling for headlines. Africa's youngest president nominated for Peace Prize. From coup to Nobel, Oslo names Traoré among contenders. The reactions were immediate and intense. In Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, citizens poured into Revolution Square, waving flags and chanting Traoré's name. For ordinary people, it was more than news, it was vindication. For once, their country was not making global headlines for insurgent attacks or poverty statistics, but for being recognized as a beacon of resilience. A young man told a local broadcaster, "The world finally sees what we see. He fights for us, not for himself." Across Africa, the mood was celebratory. Leaders in Bamako and Niamey, who were battling similar insurgencies in Mali and Niger, saw the nomination as a sign that African solutions to African problems were finally gaining international respect. Pan-African commentators called it a turning point, a signal that peace did not have to be defined only in European capitals or through Western frameworks. But in the West, the reception was divided. Some praised the nomination as a bold recognition of practical peacebuilding, noting that violence in Burkina Faso had significantly declined under Traoré's leadership. Others bristled, arguing that nominating a man who came to power through a coup risked legitimizing military takeovers. Newspapers in Paris, London, and Washington splashed skeptical headlines, framing the announcement as controversial. Yet, even those criticisms carried an unspoken admission. Something extraordinary had happened in Burkina Faso, something significant enough to capture the Nobel Committee's attention. The Vatican added a moral dimension to the debate. Pope Leo XIV issued a rare statement praising Traoré for turning swords into plowshares, a clear reference to his program that transformed former fighters into farmers. The papal endorsement forced many critics to reconsider, giving his nomination not only political but also spiritual weight. What makes this nomination so explosive is that it breaks with tradition. The Nobel Peace Prize has historically gone to activists like Malala Yousafzai, reformers like Nelson Mandela, or negotiators like Yasser Arafat. Traoré does not fit that mold. He is young, unpolished, and his rise to power was through the barrel of a gun rather than consensus. Yet the committee's recognition suggests that peace today is being measured less by speeches in grand halls and more by the daily survival of people on the ground. To understand how Traoré's name reached Oslo, one must revisit the turbulent months of 2022. Burkina Faso was collapsing under insurgent attacks, corruption, and a failing government tethered to foreign interests. The country seemed trapped in silence and despair until September 2022, when Traoré, then a little-known army captain, led a coup that toppled the government. Outside observers dismissed it as another episode in West Africa's cycle of instability. But inside Burkina Faso, it felt like a breaking point. For citizens weary of leaders who bowed to foreign dictates, Traoré's bold move was a declaration that the old order had expired. At just 34, the youngest head of state in the world, Traoré stepped forward not as a self-styled strongman but as a caretaker of the people's trust. He wore simple fatigues, spoke in plain words, and insisted that his role was not to rule but to defend the land and restore dignity. Unlike many coup leaders, Traoré refused to lock himself in the presidential palace. He traveled to rural areas, met displaced families, and made their struggles central to his leadership. He expelled French troops, forged alliances with Mali and Niger, and championed self-reliance over dependency. This defiance of foreign control ignited a wave of pride across Burkina Faso, but speeches and symbolism could only take him so far. What transformed his image from coup leader to nation builder was a daring initiative launched in May 2025, an experiment that would eventually push his name onto the Nobel list. The program was called Farmers of Peace. Its premise was radical. Instead of treating militants solely as enemies to be crushed, what if they could be transformed into farmers? More than 1,100 former fighters, many of them young men who had joined armed groups out of desperation, were invited to lay down their weapons. In return, they were given training, land, and tools. Instead of prison, they were offered a second chance. The gamble was enormous. Critics warned the militants would betray the initiative and return to violence. Yet the results were stunning. Within months, attacks in areas where the program was active dropped by nearly 70%. Villages that had been abandoned began to repopulate. Children who had missed years of schooling returned to classrooms. Markets reopened and the hum of normal life returned. The brilliance of the program lay not just in reducing violence but in transforming the psychology of conflict. Former enemies were reimagined as contributors, restoring their sense of belonging. Farmers who once feared raids now worked alongside former fighters in cooperatives. The fragile but real coexistence became a symbol of reconciliation. For Burkina Faso, it was also economic strategy. Agriculture is the backbone of survival. By tying peace to farming, Traoré addressed both food security and stability. Every acre cultivated by reformed fighters meant more food, less reliance on imports, and stronger rural communities. The world took notice. Aid organizations accustomed to endless cycles of relief suddenly saw villages managing their own recovery. Journalists documented fields of maize where burnt homes had once stood and classrooms filled with laughter where silence had dominated. Analysts hailed Farmers of Peace as one of the most innovative grassroots peace models of the decade. Still, skepticism remained. Some feared the program's calm was temporary, that reintegration might falter. Others criticized that Traoré remained a military ruler. Yet for ordinary Burkinabe, the change was undeniable. For the first time in years, there was breathing room, hope, and a sense of ownership over peace. The program resonated beyond Burkina Faso. In Mali and Niger, leaders facing the same insurgencies saw it as proof that homegrown models could succeed where foreign interventions had failed. Across Africa, intellectuals hailed the nomination as symbolic of a new era where the continent redefines peace on its own terms. The idea spread further still. In Latin America, parallels were drawn with Colombia's reintegration of guerrillas. In Asia, think tanks cited the program as an example of how rural development can double as conflict resolution. Its simplicity made it universal. Peace not as an abstract ideal but as something lived through farming, schooling, and daily survival. This global ripple effect alarmed some in Western capitals. Editorials warned that Oslo risked encouraging coups if it awarded the prize to Traoré. But even in criticism, the underlying truth was clear. Africa was beginning to write its own playbook. Pope Leo XIV's statement added spiritual weight, framing Traoré's work as a biblical transformation of warriors into workers. It gave legitimacy to what had started as a local experiment and elevated it into a moral lesson for the world. By late July 2025, Traoré's nomination had become more than personal recognition. It had turned into a continental moment. For the Nobel Committee, it was a gamble. For Africa, it was validation. And for the wider world, it was a puzzle about what peace really means in this new century. As December 10th approaches, the day the Nobel Committee will announce this year's laureate, the anticipation is thick. Awarding the prize to Traoré would break precedent, acknowledging peace built in the dust of African farmlands rather than polished conference rooms. Critics argue it risks legitimizing coups, but supporters counter that results on the ground cannot be ignored. If he wins, Traoré would become the first sitting African head of state to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. The honor would mark more than personal achievement. It would be a statement that Africa is not simply a recipient of externally designed peace strategies, but a creator of its own. In Ouagadougou, murals of Traoré already decorate city walls. Citizens speak of him as the embodiment of their collective struggle. Whether or not the prize is awarded, the nomination itself has already altered their story. From being dismissed as another coup-torn country, Burkina Faso is now recognized for crafting one of the most innovative peace models of the decade. Yet the implications stretch beyond Burkina Faso. The nomination reflects a broader geopolitical shift. As the global South asserts itself against a declining Western order, it raises profound questions about whose voices define peace and whose solutions deserve recognition. The Nobel Committee now faces a historic choice. By honoring Traoré, it would broaden the legacy of the prize, acknowledging that peace can emerge not only from negotiations and treaties but from the lived reality of communities rebuilding their lives. For the people of Burkina Faso, the deeper verdict has already been delivered. Farmers are back in their fields. Children are back in their classrooms. Villages once silenced by fear now breathe again. Whether or not Oslo awards the medal, Ibrahim Traoré's story has already planted a new seed in global imagination, that peace can be grown where no one thought it possible, and that Africa's vision of peace deserves a place at the world's highest stage.